Hi, this is Paul. I have a list of videos and thoughts that keep running around in my head. And so when I get a few minutes, it's like, okay, now maybe we can talk about it. And one of them is the Three Horizons. It's not new to Jonathan Rowson. Some of you might remember Jonathan Rowson. He had a conversation early with Jordan Peterson, actually on one of my trips to the UK. He and I almost had a recorded conversation together, but timing didn't happen and it fell through. David Fuller was sort of the guy who's going to put that together. He did this. He did this. He did this presentation in Montreal. I don't know if John Vervaeke was there too. It's an interesting presentation, but the thing that grabbed me and is stuck in my mind is this Three Horizons model, because I think it's very helpful. It's sort of a very helpful framework for sort of being able to parse out some of the elements of where we're kind of stuck in addressing, I would say, is the standard posture about Christians and the future. Because when I heard this, I thought, oh, this is helpful. And so I'm going to walk through this, and then I'm going to play the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor conversation a while ago where Peterson talks about the afterlife. Now I'm making my way through the gospel seminar, and I'm not satisfied with the way that I've gotten through it yet. I just listened to episode 8, which at this point was my favorite episode. I thought episode 8 was really good. There was a ton of stuff in there, and for me, it's not just stuff that I'm interested in, but it's also sort of through the lens of what I, as a pastor, when I listen to people, what they wrestle with, how well are they wrestling with those issues that, let's say, normal people wrestle with. But let's start with these Three Horizons, because I thought this was really helpful.
And to understand why we need them, we first need some context, and this is where we get to metacrisis. But before we bring in that language, which everyone's like, metacrisis, do we need that term? I once called it a concept only a philosopher could love, because it's got that kind of abstract, somewhat wonky feel to it. So I'm going to begin with something called the Three Horizon model. Have any of you come across the Three Horizon model? Hands up if it's familiar to you. Okay, great. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'd say maybe 10% of the room. Okay, let me take a moment then just to unpack what it means. The Three Horizon model, at entry level, it's a way of saying the present or the near future, the medium term, and the long term. Those are the three horizons. But that's not quite right. When you actually get to know the model a little better, it's more sophisticated than that. It's really about attitudes to the future in the present. Just take a moment to act.
Now, when he says that, that's exactly when he said that. That's exactly what I was trying to engage John Vervaeke on in my last conversation with him and Peugeot. Attitudes in the present towards the future. And so I'm going to play that clip, the end of that conversation with Vervaeke and Peugeot. I'm going to put that at the end of this. But what Jonathan said, that was exactly right. And now I'm not a skeptic about the afterlife, but I agree with Jordan Peterson when he says we're not quite sure what that means. And so I find sort of backing things up and saying, okay, the future is in the present in a particular way. And this is true for everyone. I mean, people who are very anxious about climate change, people who are anxious about nuclear war, people are anxious about their death, people are anxious about anything in the future, that's the future in the present. And so that's why I think certain modes of dismissal are also properly before us in that way, because the dismissal itself is a way of dealing with the future in the present. You don't have to be anxious about eternal conscious torment or collapse or climate change or your own death or something like this, because there is no future. And the future is a very strange thing, because in some ways they're right. There's always now. But we have this category of the future because we can anticipate nows that are coming, and we're almost always wrong about whole ranges of it. But we're not completely wrong. So, what he said right there I thought was so helpful.
Ask yourself, that's not quite right. When you actually get to know the model a little better, it's more sophisticated than that. It's really about attitudes to the future in the present. Just take a moment to ask yourself, what is my attitude to the future? I don't know if you've ever been asked that question before, but what's your relationship to the future? Does it feel like an...
And of course, for religious people, the attitude for the future is pretty important. And in fact, this week I just preached on, let's see, this video will come on Friday. So Saturday's video is my rough draft where I deal with the Sermon on the Plain, and I deal with the blesseds, the beatitudes, and the woes on the Sermon on the Plain. And those are very much now, then, here, there. And these really get dealt with in Gospel Seminar episode 8. And I'm so glad John Vervaeke's in that group, because I so love John's participation in that and how John provokes things. I think it's really helpful for the others. Again, many of them in the room, Dennis Prager said, are there Protestants here? And I love that one moment where Jordan Peterson says, I guess I am. But, and he's right, he is. But this future thing is super important for the religious conversation.
An intimate relationship? Does it feel distant? Does it feel... yourself, what is my attitude to the future? I don't know if you've ever been asked that question before, but what's your relationship to the future? Does it feel like an intimate relationship? Does it feel distant? Does it feel hollow? Just ask yourself, what is the future for you? And then ask yourself, how much of your time do you spend in one of the following attitudes? Because the first horizon attitude, and it's really more like a disposition than an attitude, is the managerial approach. People living in the first horizon, working in the first horizon, are contending with events as they arise.
And again, I really like what Jonathan does with this. So the first horizon, it's right here. And just think about horizons. You can see the horizon. But there are horizons beyond the ones that you can see. So the first one is sort of managerial, and that's true. And of course, we have this managerial preoccupation and the critique to it that we've seen. I mean, we've gone sort of away from a managerial posture, a presidency that has a managerial posture or a political party, into one that's more visionary and willing to break things. And I mean, that's part of what we're doing. And so this posture towards the future.
Classically, you would be solving, a lot of parenting is first horizon work. You have to get their clothes, you have to buy something from the shop, you have to make dinner. First horizon, just managing events as they go, okay? And I'm not knocking it.
And so, and all of us participate in these. But again, as he said, it's about how the future and the present, how the future impacts the present. And again, the future is a very strange thing. And for, I know Jordan takes a lot of flack for just not coming out and sounding like an evangelical or a Catholic or an Orthodox or someone, just in terms of the language that we use. But he's really trying to grok this stuff. And I respect that for him, because the truth is, when I talk to people or just examine myself, I have to admit, do we say we know what that means? And what does it mean to know what that means? I mean, this can get very meta very quickly, but so, as a pastor, so today people are practicing in the sanctuary, they're practicing music, getting ready for Sunday, and Freddie and another individual come in, and the other individual is right now having a hard time getting on his meds again. And I know, and he was baptized in this church. He's been in this church all his life. He's a beloved son of the congregation. But when he's off his meds, he's a little messy. And so, I see that, and I pop up out of my chair, and I get right in that room right away, because part of being a pastor is managerial. I have to handle the situation. And that's just what I do. I handle the situation. It's managerial. Now, it's the future, but it's a posture. And so that's part of the reason they have me here, is dealing with that first horizon.
First horizon is where we live in many ways. It's the present. It's the status quo. It's the world as it is. No need to bash it. The first horizon is okay. If you live in the first horizon, that's fine. The second horizon, I believe there's quite a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. Hands up if you identify as an entrepreneur here. One, two, okay, right. So yeah, that's 15 or so. So Horizon 2 is really where entrepreneurs typically live. It's really the sort of the place of potential, the place for investment, the place where you're trying to make something new happen, trying to bring something into being in the second horizon. So the second horizon is typically the...
And now this again, if you looked at, say, let's say the Democratic Party in America was sort of managerial. And so now Trump and Musk, they're entrepreneurs. They're sort of second horizon people. Well, let's just cancel all this stuff. I mean, so in other words, they're not managing. Now we're going to lean in towards the future. And, you know, it's for some people, that's like, great, let's stop all this stuff. It's a mess. Let's just shed it and we'll get on towards the future. Now, part of what happens politically is that if you sort of cancel all these things and change all the laws and do all of this right away, checks stop getting written and programs stop, and people who are sort of in that managerial framework, then they freeze up, because then suddenly the second horizon impinges on the first horizon, because maybe they're not out of money yet, or their grant isn't out of money yet, or their program isn't out of money yet, but now they see that in a year or two they will be out of money soon. And so if it's, let's say, you know, at my age now, my wife and I are like, okay, well, the second horizon is sort of retirement. The first horizon was very deep and chaotic and busy. Well, all the kids are launched pretty much. Now we're starting to eat into the second horizon. But again, a lot of it is like, how does the future live in me now?
The world of the entrepreneur. First horizon, managerial. Second horizon, entrepreneurial, innovation. Innovation is the key word for the second horizon. And the third horizon is typically something more like the vision. We talk about it as the distant future, but really it's that which is somewhat beyond our everyday concerns and everyday activities. The quality of the third horizon is the visionary, one who's trying to see beyond the present moment and is even going beyond immediate opportunities and innovations. Now, that's the sort of brief description of it, right? Everyone...
Okay, now, clearly, heaven, hell, perdition, salvation, all of those are third horizon things. Now remember, again, these horizons are how we deal with them now. And so I thought that was just such a nice way of saying, okay, so now we've got these questions. And part of what, you know, I was trying to engage rather unsuccessfully, I think, with John Vervaeke was, okay, well, that third horizon, you have to talk about the advent of the sacred. You're going to be dealing with the first horizon, the managerial. You're going to be dealing with the second horizon, the entrepreneurial. And you're also going to be dealing with the third horizon. I think the third horizon is inevitable. And so when worldviews have implications in terms of that third horizon. And when atheists say, well, there's just nothing you can't remember before you were born, so that will be like that. Okay. But that has an impact in now. And it's told that way to have an impact in now. There's no escaping this. And I think actually utopian is usually what's sort of pointed to, but I wonder if utopian is much more located in the second horizon rather than the third. Because the third horizon, even for, let's say, Star Trek, optimist, utopians, the third horizon is even beyond that. It is and this is where Jordan Peterson's comments about trying to understand it. I think that, again, he is bumping into the third horizon and recognizing the third horizon is always with us. And so if you understand what traditional religions have done, they have provided a third horizon. I think the third horizon is inevitable. And so you're not going to be able to avoid it.
with me so far? Basic mapping of three horizons. It matters quite a bit for what comes next. So I'm going to take a bit of time to get this right. You'll see my colleague Ivo Mensch there saying collectively we are living a life that no longer exists. That's a way of saying that the world of consumer capitalism, indefinite growth, democratic nation states, a world of nuclear weapons, a world of growing AI, although whether that's the extent to which AI is a massive change and the extent to which it's an overinflated bubble is an open question. But certainly the world that we recognize from the news, many people feel that they're in a kind of dream, that on the one hand, they go to the shop, they buy their milk, they carry on living as normal. But in the news, the message they're getting on their smartphones and social media is that somehow this world is breaking down. They don't know how quickly. John mentioned revolution. It's not clear if it's going to happen tomorrow, but there's this sense of the world making less and less sense and feeling less and less stable. I don't want to be too leading, but who feels that characterizes their own experience? That the world, it makes less and less sense, first of all, and also that it's less and less stable. Yeah. Anyone who just, out of interest, who doesn't feel that, who feels it's just more or less the same. Okay, interesting. It's good to have you
Just seeing if I recognize anybody there.
here. Don't worry. Because I don't want to.
But again, now you can feel that shift, especially after the Trump inauguration. And everybody in both parties feels that shift. Of course, one group feels more optimistic, pessimistic, and it's not just American parties, Canadians. I mean, this is the way that the American empire has ripples throughout the world. But again, I don't want to shift the focus to the political because the focus isn't on the political. Just even the way he said it, we live in a world that no longer exists. I mean, that is the kind of dislocation that a lot of people are feeling, but they're going to feel it differently depending on, in a sense, which horizon they are living in, and it is impinging on them. Now, this is part of why and how religions function, because I think religions function very much to manage the horizons. And part of how religions create civilizations and create societies is that they deal with all three horizons. And by dealing with all three horizons, because depending on what your third horizon is, and again, secularity sort of puts this iron box around and says, we can't know the third horizon. We have to be skeptical about the third horizon, but there is no null. Now, this is part of what happened with conversations about atheism, was that the new atheism said, well, the third horizon is null. And a lot of apologists said, there is no null. What that means is that third horizon is going to impinge on people. And that third horizon is going to have an existential impact, and it is going to backflow through the other ones. And that's basically where you get, I would say, the meaning crisis and nihilism. Because again, I go back to part of the reason I'm not doing a lot of Randos conversations now is they're not the same. The moment when I started doing Randos conversations in those early years in 2016 the meaning crisis was very real, and Jordan Peterson was doing something to the people in the meaning crisis. And you could hear it and watch it and see it in those early Randos conversations. People were in the midst of a crisis of nihilism-induced depression. And somehow listening to Jordan Peterson got them out of it. Now we're in a little different place now. But I mean, what Jonathan said there, I think is super helpful in terms of this is the dislocation people are feeling now.
Everyone, there's only groupthink to break out here. Right, but the call of the third horizon is for those who say we need to rethink the world, reimagine the world. Not just tweak it, not just change it slightly, but actually get to some different underlying operating logic, different sense of priorities, different sense of purpose. Now, the language that that I use here is stuckness. The problem is the world being stuck. More technically, it's about our immunity to change. The challenge is those who say, okay, we've got a major ecological crisis, what are we going to do about it? There have been many, I think that's about 23 UN reports with increasing alarm saying...
Oh, okay. So I know some of you are triggered already about climate change. That's not the point here. The point is that the third horizon is always with us. And unless you actually engage in the third horizon, it's going to engage in you. That's my point. All right. First, I'm going to play the Peterson, Alex O'Connor thing, and then I'm going to play the Vervaeke thing, and then I'll have a little bit of branding.
No, Jesus
it's really good.
Clean up
it's
your room
really
for
good
you,
to
you know?
have a divine ally.
Mm.
And I think the more unerringly you aim upward, the more you walk with God.
Mm-hmm.
And that does mean that Christ is beside you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a reflection of the truth of vicarious redemption. But that doesn't mean you have nothing to do.
Mm.
Right. And Christ makes that very clear in the Gospels. Not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, right? Only those who do the will of my Father.
You must be willing to hate your brother and your father.
There's a tension there because the vicarious redemption idea is a reflection of the mercy of God.
Mm.
It's like if you, and I believe this to be the case, as I said, if your aim is upward, then God is your ally, right? And so he's there with you, bearing the cross, but you're still obliged to carry it, right? And you see that in the story too. That's embedded in the Passion story because there's an insistence in traditional Christianity that the suffering and the death that a man would experience in that situation were real, despite the fact that God was also experiencing it, right? So there's this duality. And I think that's reflected in the idea of vicarious redemption when it's understood properly. It's like, yes, you'll have... Here's another way of thinking about it, is that if you aim upward unerringly, you have the spirit of what's good. What are you saying? You've established a relationship with the spirit of what's the highest good. Well, then that's with you. And that's not just a reality. It's like the ultimate reality. It's Nietzsche even alluded to that when he said, if you have a why, you can bear any how.
Yeah.
Well, what why? Well, the ultimate why. Well, what does that enable you to do? To bear the ultimate how. And that's exactly what the Passion story is. And so there is a vicarious redemption there because if you do it properly, you don't have to do it alone. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing on you. You know, and you see that too. There's an insistence in the entire biblical library that what humans are called to do is real. Like we're made in the image of God. We're participating in the process by which possibility is transformed in order. We're building, as far as I'm concerned, we're either building the city of God or we're building its alternative, right? It's the domain of hell. Actually, really, as well as metaphysically.
I mean, it's interesting you say hell and actually in the same sentence because...
Well, it's easier to believe in hell than heaven.
Well, one of the other criticisms that I made of you in this video was that I felt like you were appropriating religious language illegitimately to apply a sense of the sacred to profane things, to mundane things. And that's perhaps one example. So I can give you a few examples. I mean, one is implied in what you just said there, but you said it, I think, explicitly to Matt Fradd recently on Pints with Aquinas, where you said, if you have studied any amount of history and you don't believe that hell is real,
right,
then you're an idiot.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I understand, I think, what you mean by that, because hell, like, you know, hell is a place on earth in many respects, right? Like if you study history and you look at just like what levels of depravity humanity can sink to. Like, and you could quite poetically say, well, if hell isn't the right word to describe that, then I don't know what is.
Right.
Say something like that, right? But clearly, a theological conception of hell does not exist on planet Earth. It's somewhere you go after
It's
you die.
not so clear. I wouldn't say it's so clear.
Well, certainly not in like the Jewish tradition. And okay,
Dante?
maybe not in the okay, maybe not. But like, I mean, like a modern Christian who asks you, for example, do you believe in hell? And you know that what they mean
the place you go after you die.
The place you go after you die.
Yeah.
Then when you respond and say, sort of, well, of course hell is real. Well, you don't believe in hell? Have you studied any amount of history? If you know, it's sort of, it feels like you're sort of describing two different things. There's a simplification. The other area where this largely happens, I think, is when you've said that the very act of doing science.
See, there's a concordance there between that concept of eternal punishment in the afterlife and the hell that unites all totalitarian states. But I don't know what the concordance is. Like I don't understand.
Like, do you think
and I don't speculate generally on anything that's, let's say, beyond death. I mean, what the hell can you say about that? I don't have anything to say about that.
But that's another I don't know point, right? So if I ask you, for example, you know, do you think that Hitler is being punished now? You know, I mean, he's dead, but is he being punished? Or did he ever get punished?
The answer to that question is something like, what is the relationship between the evanescent consciousness of man and eternity? And the answer is, we don't know.
Yeah, when Matt Fradd asked you, do you believe in an afterlife? You said that something like your behaviors or your actions resonate through eternity.
There's that, which is, in a way, an evasive answer too. But the thing is, we don't understand. We exist in relationship to the infinite, obviously. What that relationship is, no one knows how to conceptualize that in the final analysis. I don't understand the relationship between our binding temporally and eternity. Like, is there something permanent about our conscious experience? I don't know.
I think you excite your Christian listenership when you say, like, not only, you know, do I believe in hell, but you can't not believe in hell. I mean, are you serious? You seriously don't believe in hell? And they think, here's a strong sort of warrior.
Well, and you go, the other.
But then they realize that what you mean by hell is just like,
it's so
lots of human suffering and catastrophe, you know, on planet Earth.
But it's more than that, because because it is the case that the invitation to hell is offered by the eternal usurper of the moral order. That's true. You end up in hell because you lie. That's also true. And so,
but when you say that's true, you end up in hell because you lie.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
The totalitarian
you're not allowed to use the word hell,
say.
right? Like, what is the thing you're describing? You end up where? In a totalitarian state.
Yes.
And that's fine.
A state of ultimate misery.
But I think this is where somebody might be prone to confusion. And you could say that's their fault, maybe it is. But if somebody's listening to you and do you believe in hell? And you say, of course I believe in hell. How can you not believe in hell? And they go, you know, thank goodness, because that of course is my worldview. I'd love to know how I can defend my vision of hell. And then they realize that when you say hell, what you actually mean is something like totalitarian human regimes.
I guess I mean at least that.
Sure.
Right? And so
fine.
I'm often trying to make a minimal case, right? If I'm trying to elaborate on the meaning of a religious text. What I'm trying to say in all humility is it means at least this. Now, does that cover the entire territory of the meaning? That's very unlikely. You're going to give an exhaustive account? I don't think so. What does that mean in eternity? It's the same question, and then we should draw this part to a close. It's the same question in some sense as the reality of the resurrection of Christ. So the Christian interpretation is Christ defeats death and hell. Okay, well, the logical objection to that is, well, where's the evidence for the defeat? Since death still exists, and so does malevolence.
Yeah, sure.
Well, the Christians then will escape, so to speak, into something like a symbolic interpretation and say, well, it's true in eternity. And I think fair enough. I do believe that the idea that Christ defeated death and hell is true. But I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
My question, though, John, for your project is the lift you want to get from the advent of the sacred. I hear the optimism, I hear the I hear the eschatology in that phrase.
Yes.
And I wonder if, because I think the power from that, just from a pastoral perspective, in terms of working with regular people in the pews, the power they get from that is, for them, the New Jerusalem. The power in a Christian funeral is, my beloved is now with Christ and await a resurrection. That is a power in the narrative that gives a civilization a courage and an optimism to face the bottom end of the stack of the sacred. And
I
so
like
in
that.
terms of the process and in terms of the project, my question is, where do you get the energy so that the crush of the bottom end can be faced and not lose the glory of the top of the stack?
So I'm not quite sure what the question is. So let me ask you a question back. Are you saying, uh, I, I'm taking you to, I'm going to believe that you're not saying that other religions and other traditions don't have deep responses
No,
to
no. I'm not saying that.
A funeral is a human universal, like music.
Right.
Okay.
I only really know the Christian tradition, so
Right.
that's what I
want to
speak
make,
from.
I just want to make sure, right?
Yep.
And so, I mean, and many of these traditions, right, have different, I'll use your language. It's not quite right. It's a bit culturally anachronistic, but they have eschatological visions. There's moksha, there's nirvana, right? There's becoming one with the Tao. Um, and then I want to say that's where the power comes from. Like when people, when they have a virtuosity, in Taoism, it's called te, right? Right. When they have that virtuosity, like the problem with asceticism, and the reason I'm worried about the gym bros is that you can get one version of that is I'm going to harden myself against reality. And the Buddha rejected asceticism because that hardening doesn't work. And the paradox is, and this is what Taoism argues, is you have to become really soft. You have to be, but that doesn't mean limp and weak. It means soft like flowing water, which is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And I think, I, I think, if I understand you correctly, uh, the city of God, the city on the hill, moksha, nirvana, uh, right, are all what I would call the imaginal. I think they are images we shouldn't look at, but through which we should look in a way that reality can disclose its awe-filledness, and I'm playing with that word, while also still calling us, the stories also give us exemplars of how to cultivate the virtue of reverence. If you're asking me, do I think narratives are essential to this process? I do. But you want to say something more, so I'm not quite getting you, I think.
I don't. There's a. We talked about the sacred, and the sacred has this, in this world. The sacred has this balance, and practically people. I mean, why should someone celebrate the advent of the sacred and welcome it? So again, during the Advent, the Christian season of Advent, even though it's a fasting season, and as
Oh,
Jonathan said, Christmas is super complex in this world for Christians, because I also believe that one of the things that we see in the Gospels is, one of the things I hear Jesus saying regularly is, I'm pointing you to the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, but this world right here and right now isn't really terribly capable of holding all of it. It's too small. It's sort of like hot air holds more water than cold air. And this world is too cold, and the amount of glory and the amount of power and the amount of blessing that I dearly want to give you cannot be finally held by this world. And so basically my observation in that is the way that Christianity works for civilizations in terms of I mean, Christianity has allowed people to not only survive but flourish through tremendous sufferings over the course of time. And again, I'm not doing a comparative with other religions because I just simply don't know. So
Sure.
my
Well,
point isn't the
I'll play in your
comparative.
ballpark. I'll play in your ballpark.
Okay. So the question is, there's an energy that Christians throughout time have received from eschatology that I think is essential to the system.
Okay. Yeah, I want to. So there is now, because I'm playing in your ballpark, I want you to take the words I'm using in that spirit. There's an eschatological energy to the advent of the sacred, which is exactly that the advent of the sacred is not our individual or conceptual responses. It is the response of ultimate reality to the meaning crisis.
But there's also, I think, one of the things you're pointing to, Paul.
Let me say one more thing, and that is deeply, deeply important to people. People are starving, right? Scarcity mentality, deeply starving, and when we're in scarcity mentality, we're rigid, we're short-term, we're impulsive, we're irrational, we're egocentric. And people are seeing that is ripping the world apart. People want release from that. The energy is, do you want release from that? And do you want religio? Do you want the abundant life? Jesus also promised the abundant life, and he also promised that people would do even greater than he did. I'm quoting the Bible. I'm not saying something new agey, right? And so I think that the energy that I'm seeing in all these communities is people are energized by this precisely because it is a salvation, right? It is a healing of the meaning crisis, and it is also spiritual food that is growing them up in ways that they could not have done before. Now, sorry for Jonathan, but I wanted to finish that point.
No, I think what I was trying to point out in terms of what I think, Paul, I don't know if I'm wrong. I think one of the things you're presenting is that the vision, let's say the vision of the heavenly Jerusalem, for example, it's a cosmic vision. It's not an individual vision, although the individual plays a part in it. It's a vision of an entire world. So it has everything of a world. It has, it has the natural element, the civilizational element. It has the participation of all people, and it's something which in some ways is not in this world. It's in the next world. It's in the new heaven and the new earth. It calls us towards itself, right? And we call for it, right? This whole idea of the calling for Lord Jesus, right, at the end of the book of Revelation too, like this image of we're calling for this to come. We also understand that it's not, when I say this, it is a vision of what is coming or what is possible or what the next world or the best world it can afford us, and it's also a cohesive vision. That is, it's not. Can I say this? Like, it doesn't just remain at the level of the individual, or even at the level of a community, or at the level of a, I don't want to pick on, I don't want to pick on Rafe particularly. I like Rafe and I love what he's doing, let's say, and say the practices that they're doing. They don't, I don't think they scale. They don't encompass a vision of how it is that this relates to the city, and how does this relate to us coming together? How does it relate to the hierarchical relationship between the city and the tree and the water and all of these images, and the sacrifice that is there at the middle of the image? That is, I think that's what, because when I talk about the advent of the sacred, I'm talking also about civilizational things. I'm talking about, something like the Civil War in America is a sacred event for the identity of America, that all these kind of terrifying things. So the question is, how do we answer that? Like, what possible stance can we have, or what vision can we keep in the imaginal space in order to help us face the aspects of what's coming or what's happening or what might, what's coming over the hill, that has all these levels in it.
Yeah, but it's there. That's what and I started by talking about a new world is coming. A new world is being born here. We talked about, right? We have a leveled ontology with participation, right? That affords strong transcendence, not just psychological improvement. It has ontological, right? It has existential import to it. It gives you new truths that are otherwise inaccessible. Listen to the title of a book by a scientist, Eric Hole, "The World Behind the World." This is what I'm talking about. The Advent is a whole new way in which the world is worlding, and that's the world isn't a thing, right? And this is, goes back, Jonathan. I'm alluding to Heidegger here, of course, but this is now not just in the corners of Heideggerian philosophy, like the world behind the world, or putting us back into the equation, right? And all these books. Because what's happening is there is there is a new world that is being born right now. And many people are attracted and energized by this. And it's turning into real scientific work. And this is energizing. Like I said, the work of Michael Levin. I do think that Rafe is moving constantly towards a much more encompassing relationship for the disclosure of the world. And
I'm sorry, I hate to pick on that, not pick or like take him as an example.
No.
What
I think is he's responsive of it. And when I talk to these groups, there is the shifting, the ones that aren't going culty and creepy and weird, right? When I talk to these groups, right? And there's a lot that aren't going culty and creepy and
no,
weird,
I believe you.
right? There is this movement towards, again, how I talked about this. We're making a space so a new worlding of the world can happen. That's part of the advent of the sacred. And people, this is what is energizing them, Paul. They want to live in that world.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I was trying to get at.
So I'm hearing this, and again, as Jonathan said, I mean, I hate that I sort of sometimes feel it's 2-on-1 in these, but John, you're a pretty potent guy, so you can handle us. But when I hear you say something like a new world is being born right now, I don't quite know the register in which to hear that. I mean, I'm sure some people will hear it as utopian, but I also understand that, part of the reason the city on the hill language happened, and if you look at, let's say, the roots of something like New Haven, Connecticut, something of what the Puritans were doing wasn't that far away from what Constantine was doing with the founding of Constantinople and everything that Eusebius writes with respect to that. So, so part of what, Christianity has long, I mean, the part of Christian doctrine that is the least developed is, of course, the eschatological, and Protestant
I think
sort
for
of
good reason. I think that's good. I think the sacred is at work in that.
Right. But and when I hear you say that, part of me wonders if I'm also hearing something of, and no, please don't take this as an insult because it's not meant in any way, and it's simply a factor of our Christian civilization that none of us in many ways can escape, that there is something of the immanentized eschatological and an optimism in there. And so, say Mary Harrington, who is skeptical about progressive or progress, let's say. So when I hear you say it, part of me is, I'm just trying to get my head around, what register should I hear this in? Because I know on your tombstone, you're disavowing utopianism. And on one hand, we all need optimism in terms of the projects with which we participate in our lives and our callings that move us forward. So when you say something, a new world is being born right now, every politician says that, and even those who lose elections. And that then again sort of brings me back around. What I love about the advent of the sacred is that both of these sort of have a back and forth effect to it, because every time you get to Advent, I think naturally in our post-Protestant age, we sort of hear progress. And then we get to sacred, and it's going to be rebalancing us. Because remember, this world always has both ends of the sacred, and we go back and forth. So when you say a new world is being born right now, I don't know the valence in which to hear it.
What I mean by that is, like, the world that we thought was the world, the domesticated world of all the disastrous dichotomies, is falling away, like the scales falling away from Paul's eyes. And there's a new way of seeing. And in that new way of seeing, there's a new way of being, in which transcendence, I call it strong transcendence, not just psychological improvement, but it has epistemological and ontological depth to it, is now scientifically plausible. Think about that. Think about the possibility of that we can talk deeply about this in a way that reaches to the depths of what people are often hungering for in religion, without buying into the dichotomy between religion and science. That is possible. Now, I'm not arguing for scientism. Scientism is part of the Enlightenment picture I'm rejecting.
Yep,
I'm arguing for what you see in, and I think hopefully we're exapting, Maximus or Dionysius or Thomas Aquinas, which is no, you better not keep these two apart, because that's disastrous. That's disastrous. And so I'm trying to play in the Christian ballpark, right? There has been this continual recognition in the Christian traditions that if you keep these things separated from each other, that is a hole through which evil walks, and you have to keep them bound. This is what I'm talking about. This is the register, that there is a world in which the scales on our eyes of all the dichotomies, right, that straitjacket us, is falling away, and in which strong transcendence is possible. And so that there is a way, individually and collectively, and even at the level of a civilization, we can participate in a response to the Enlightenment. We can wake up. We can grow up. I'm sorry, I find that deeply personally motivating, and I know a lot of people do. So I don't know if I'm addressing your question, but that's what it. And I keep using the biblical language because I'm trying to, and I don't think that language is utopic. When the scales fall away from Paul's eyes, he doesn't propose, he doesn't say let's build Jerusalem on the hill like Blake, which is a little bit worrying. It's a great poem, Jerusalem, but it's a little bit, until we've built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. I don't know if you should be doing that. That's probably not a good idea, right? Right. Although I love
a lot of
that.
people love that song.
I love that. That poem is one of my favorite. And and the thing is, if you give yourself over to the poem, you feel the triumph, but that triumph is dangerous, and that we've been talking about that. So when I say no utopia, I don't mean no vision. Without a vision, the people perish. When I say nostalgia, I don't mean no tradition. I'm arguing for in the cognitive science of religion, and I'm arguing for it a little bit in the cognitive science of ritual. We need tradition. We need credible role models that we find trustworthy of wisdom, because that is actually predictive, by the way, of whether or not you're religious. All the Enlightenment fables that people are religious because they're sloppy thinkers, they're intuitive, and if they become more analytic, they're right, then they become atheistic, and they only turn to religion when they're impoverished. Those are scientific proposals, they're hypotheses. Guess what? When atheist researchers went out and looked at them, they've all been disconfirmed. What makes people religious or not religious are the credible individuals that they're living with. So if the people you look up to, that you find, they demonstrate credibility enhancing displays, that's the technical term. If they're theists, you're a theist. If they're atheist, you'll be an atheist, right? Now, obviously there's individuals that break away from that, but that tradition, I'm not saying no tradition. I'm not saying no vision. This is how it's different from what I was saying before. But traditions have to live. Jonathan said it. We can exhaust them. They need to be respirated, right? And that's what I think is happening. And that's what I'm trying to talk about.
It's 12. Sadly, I need to go. I think it's a great
Yeah.
place to finish, by the way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so I have to leave. But Paul, thanks for hosting this as usual. It's
Well,
great.
Yeah.
thank you both. And I will send you the recordings, and you can do with them as you please.
I'll
And
post it on my channel. I think this was wonderful. Thank you to both of you. This was really wonderful. And not to trivialize this, but hopefully to appropriately situate it. This was kind of an extended advertisement for the Philosophical Silk Road, which I really appreciated. So thank you for that.
there you go. There you go. All right, gentlemen. Have a great day.
All right, you
Take
too.
care, my
Bye-bye.
friends.
All right. Bye-bye.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. A ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. A hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad, daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. Always on the brink of somewhere. Each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river. Dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us. Baptized in ball pits. A clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please. Say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers, see what I say, just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. I think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host, who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.